autumn of 1838, soldiers came to a farmhouse in the hills of Georgia and gave the family inside a few minutes to leave forever. The family was Cherokee. They were not savages living in the wild, whatever the men who took their land chose to believe. They lived in a sturdy house that they had built with their own hands. They farmed their fields. Their children could read and write in English and in their own Cherokee language, which had its own alphabet, invented by one of their own people. They had a constitution modeled on the one in Washington. They had a newspaper printed in 2 languages. They had schools and churches and courts and elected leaders. By almost any measure the United States itself used to define a civilized people, the Cherokee were civilized. And it did not save them, because they were sitting on land that other people wanted. When the soldiers came that autumn, they did not give the family time to pack. A woman would later remember being allowed to take almost nothing, herded out of her own home at the point of a bayonet, turning back just once to see white men already moving in to take what her family had spent generations building. Some families watched their houses burned behind them. Others watched strangers move in before they were even out of sight. Whole towns were emptied in a single day. And then the long walk began. It would come to be remembered by a single, heartbreaking name: the Trail of Tears. More than 1,000 miles, on foot, through the dead of one of the coldest winters anyone could remember. And by the time it was over, of the roughly 16,000 Cherokee who were driven west, around 4,000 were dead. A quarter of an entire nation gone. Lost to cold, to hunger, to sickness, and to heartbreak, buried in shallow graves along a trail that stretched across half a continent. This is the story of how that happened. How a peaceful, settled, literate nation of farmers and families was rounded up at gunpoint and marched into the wilderness by a country that called itself a land of liberty. It is a story of greed and broken promises, and an injustice so vast that even at the time, many Americans were ashamed of it. But more than that, it is the story of the people themselves. The mothers and fathers and children who walked that trail. Who they were, what they lost, and how, even in the face of everything, they refused to be erased. To understand the size of what was taken, you first have to understand what was there before. Because the Cherokee did not vanish into history as a footnote. They were a thriving nation with a world of their own, and that world was very much alive right up until the day it was destroyed. Long before the soldiers came, the Cherokee had lived in the southern Appalachian Mountains for countless generations. Their homeland spread across what would later become Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Alabama, a land of green mountains, deep forests, and clear rivers. It was beautiful country, and it was theirs, woven through with their towns, their farms, their sacred places, and the graves of their ancestors going back further than memory could reach. They were farmers, most of all. They grew corn, beans, and squash, the foods their people had grown for centuries. They kept livestock. They built solid homes. And in the decades before the removal, they had done something that, by the logic of the people pressing in around them, should have protected them completely. They had adapted. They had taken on many of the ways of the Americans who now surrounded them, not out of weakness, but out of a determination to survive in a changing world. The transformation was astonishing, and it happened fast. Within a single generation, the Cherokee built something that looked, in many ways, like a small nation rising in the heart of the American South. At the center of it was one of the most remarkable achievements in human history, and it came from a single man. His name was Sequoyah. He could not read or write any language, and he became fascinated by what he called the talking leaves, the way the white men could make marks on paper and send their thoughts across great distances. So he set out to do something that almost no individual in all of history has ever done alone. He invented a writing system for his own language, from nothing. It took him years. People mocked him, thought he had lost his mind. But he kept working, and in the end he created a set of symbols, one for each sound in the Cherokee language. And it worked. It worked so well that it could be learned in a matter of weeks. Within just a few years of Sequoyah completing his system, a huge portion of the Cherokee Nation had learned to read and write their own language. The literacy rate among the Cherokee rose to rival, and by some measures surpass that of the white settlers around them. It remains one of the only times in recorded history that a single person, working alone, invented a complete writing system that an entire people then adopted. With the written word came everything else. The Cherokee started their own newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, printed in both Cherokee and English, the first newspaper ever published by a native nation. They wrote down their laws. In 1827, they adopted a written constitution, closely modeled on the Constitution of the United States, with an elected government, a court system, and a capital city called New Echota. They declared themselves a sovereign nation, with the right to govern their own land and their own people. They built schools where Cherokee children learned to read and write. Many became Christians and built churches. They had farms and plantations, mills and ferries and trading posts. Some Cherokee grew wealthy. They wore the same clothes as their white neighbors, lived in the same kind of houses, ran the same kind of businesses. A traveler passing through Cherokee country in the 1820s would have seen prosperous farms, neat homes, and a people who had, in a single generation, transformed almost every part of how they lived. They had done, in other words, exactly what the United States government had told native peoples they should do. For years, American leaders had said that if the Indians would only give up their old ways, become farmers, become Christians, become civilized, then they could live alongside white Americans in peace. The Cherokee had taken that promise seriously. They had remade their entire society around it. They had become, by every standard the Americans claimed to value, a model of what a native nation could be. And it made no difference at all. Because underneath all the talk of civilization, the real issue had never been about how the Cherokee lived. It was about where they lived. They were sitting on millions of acres of fertile land in the heart of the cotton-growing South. And in 1829, something happened that turned the pressure on that land from a steady push into an unstoppable flood. They found gold. Gold was discovered on Cherokee land in northern Georgia, the first major gold rush in American history. And almost overnight, the trickle of white settlers wanting Cherokee land became a stampede. Prospectors poured onto Cherokee territory illegally by the thousands. The state of Georgia, hungry for the land and the gold beneath it, began passing laws designed to make Cherokee life impossible. Laws that stripped the Cherokee of legal rights. Laws that said a Cherokee could not testify against a white man in court. Laws that seized Cherokee land and handed it out to white citizens by lottery, while the Cherokee families who owned it were still living on it. The Cherokee were being squeezed deliberately and systematically by a state that wanted them gone. And standing behind Georgia, encouraging all of it, was a man who had just become the most powerful person in the country. A man who had built his entire career, in part, on fighting and removing native people. The new President of the United States, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson had spent much of his life fighting native peoples. He had led brutal military campaigns against them, and he had built his reputation, in part, on taking their land. He believed, with total conviction, that native nations had no place in the eastern United States, and that they should all be moved west, beyond the Mississippi River, to make room for white settlement. When he became president in 1829, he finally had the power to make that belief a reality. In 1830, Jackson pushed a law through Congress called the Indian Removal Act. On its surface, the law sounded almost reasonable. It authorized the government to negotiate with native nations, offering them land in the West in exchange for their land in the East. The key word, the word that mattered, was negotiate. The removal was supposed to be voluntary. The government was not supposed to force anyone off their land. It was supposed to make a fair offer and let the tribes decide. That, at least, was the promise. The reality would be something very different. The debate over the Indian Removal Act was fierce. Many Americans were horrified by it. They saw it, correctly, as a betrayal of treaties the United States had signed and a moral stain on the nation. One congressman, the famous frontiersman Davy Crockett, broke with his own party and his own president to oppose it, knowing it might end his political career. It did. Ministers preached against it. Citizens signed petitions against it. In the end, the law passed, but only barely, squeaking through Congress by a razor-thin margin. Even in its own time, this was not something the country did with a clear conscience. It was deeply, bitterly contested, and it passed anyway. The Cherokee, to their enormous credit, did not respond with violence. They could have. They were a proud people with warriors of their own, but their leaders, above all their principal chief, a man named John Ross, made a fateful decision. They would fight, but they would fight using the white man's own weapons. They would fight in the courts. They would use the law, the Constitution, the treaties, the very system the Americans claimed to honor. They would prove that what was being done to them was illegal, and they would make the United States live up to its own promises. John Ross was an unusual man to lead this fight. He was only a small part Cherokee by blood, mostly Scottish in ancestry, and he could have easily walked away and lived as a white man. But he had chosen the Cherokee, heart and soul, and he would devote his entire life to them. He was stubborn, brilliant, and utterly devoted to his people, and he believed, with everything in him, that the law would protect them if only they could get their case heard. And remarkably, the Cherokee took their case all the way to the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court of the United States. And even more remarkably, they won. In a landmark case, the Supreme Court ruled, in effect, that the Cherokee Nation was a distinct community, with its own territory in which the laws of Georgia had no force. The state of Georgia had no right to seize their land or impose its laws upon them. By the highest legal authority in America, the Cherokee were in the right. It should have been the end of it. The law had spoken. The Cherokee had played by the rules, taken their case to the proper authority, and been vindicated. In any nation that truly respected its own laws, that would have settled the matter. But Andrew Jackson was president, and Andrew Jackson did not care what the Supreme Court said. There is a famous line, often attributed to him in response to the ruling. The Chief Justice has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Whether he said those exact words or not, they captured the reality perfectly. The court had no army. The president did, and the president had no intention of protecting the Cherokee. He simply ignored the highest court in his own country and let Georgia continue tightening the noose. The law had protected the Cherokee on paper, and the most powerful man in America had torn that paper in half. The Cherokee had won their case, and it meant nothing. And now they were running out of options. As the pressure grew unbearable, a terrible division opened up within the Cherokee Nation itself. And it is one of the most painful parts of the whole story, because it set good men against each other, with the fate of their people hanging in the balance. On one side stood John Ross and the great majority of the Cherokee, who refused to leave. Their position was simple. This was their land. It had been theirs for countless generations. The law was on their side. They would not sell. They would not go, no matter what. But on the other side, a smaller group of Cherokee leaders had come to a different, agonizing conclusion. Chief among them was a respected older leader named Major Ridge, along with his son and his nephew. These were not bad men. They were not traitors in their own minds. They had looked at the situation with clear and despairing eyes, and they had concluded that removal was now inevitable. The whites would never stop coming. Georgia would never relent. Jackson would never protect them. And so, they reasoned it was better to negotiate now, to get the best possible terms, some money, some land in the West, while the Cherokee still had something to bargain with, than to wait and be driven out with nothing. To stay, they believed, was to watch their people destroyed. Leaving was the only way to save them. It was a heartbreaking calculation, made by men who genuinely believed they were trying to save their nation. But they had no authority to make it. The vast majority of the Cherokee and their elected government under John Ross were utterly opposed. And yet, in December of 1835, this small faction did the unthinkable. They met at the Cherokee capital of New Echota, and without the approval of the Cherokee government, without the consent of the people, they signed a treaty with the United States, the Treaty of New Echota. In it, this tiny minority agreed to give up all of the Cherokee land in the east in exchange for money and territory in the west. They signed away the homeland of an entire nation, even though they represented almost no one. Major Ridge understood exactly what he had done. As he made his mark on the treaty, he is said to have spoken words that would prove horribly prophetic. "I have signed my death warrant." He knew that Cherokee law decreed death for anyone who sold tribal land without permission. He had done it anyway, believing it was the only way to save his people from something worse. The treaty was a fraud, and everyone knew it. It had been signed by a handful of men who had no right to sign it. John Ross was outraged. He gathered the signatures of the Cherokee people in protest, an enormous petition signed by nearly 16,000 Cherokee, almost the entire nation, begging the United States Senate to reject this illegitimate treaty. 16,000 voices against a few dozen. It did not matter. The treaty gave the United States exactly what it wanted, a legal-looking piece of paper that authorized the removal. And so, despite knowing it was rejected by almost the entire Cherokee nation, the Senate took it up for a vote. The debate was bitter. Some senators were disgusted, calling it the fraud that it was. The great orator and writer Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote a public letter of protest, warning that such an act would stain the honor of the nation forever. And in the end, the Treaty of New Echota passed the United States Senate by a single vote. One vote. The margin by which an entire nation was condemned to be torn from its home. The most consequential decision in the history of the Cherokee people, made for them by strangers, came down to one man's choice. Now the United States had its treaty. The Cherokee were given a deadline. They had 2 years to leave their homes voluntarily and move west. After that, they would be removed by force. The clock began to tick, and John Ross, still refusing to give up, spent those 2 years fighting on, certain that he could still find a way to save his people's home. He could not. And when the 2 years ran out, in the spring of 1838, the soldiers came. In May of 1838, the deadline passed. By then, only about 2,000 Cherokee had left voluntarily. The other 16,000 were still in their homes, still farming their fields, still living their lives, still hoping against hope that this nightmare would somehow not come to pass. President Jackson was gone by now, his term ended, but his chosen successor, Martin Van Buren, carried out his policy without hesitation. He sent in the army. General Winfield Scott arrived in Cherokee country with 7,000 soldiers, with orders to round up every last Cherokee and drive them west. What followed was a thing of nightmares. The soldiers fanned out across the Cherokee nation, and they did not give people time to prepare. They came to homes without warning, often when families were in the middle of their daily lives, a mother cooking a meal, children playing in the yard, men working in the fields. And the soldiers would level their bayonets and order them out immediately with whatever they could carry in their hands. There was no time to gather belongings, no time to pack food or warm clothes or the small treasures of a lifetime. Families were marched away from their homes with nothing, and behind them, the looting began at once. White settlers and soldiers ransacked the abandoned houses, taking furniture, livestock, tools, anything of value. Some families, looking back, saw their own homes already in flames, or saw strangers driving away their cattle before they were even out of the yard. Graves were robbed for the silver ornaments buried with the dead. An entire people's worth of possessions, homes, and land, built up over generations, was stripped away in a matter of days. The Cherokee were herded into hastily built stockades, crude prison camps surrounded by wooden walls. And there they were held, through the heat of the summer, waiting. The conditions in these camps were horrific. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of people, crowded together with little food, filthy water, and no sanitation. Disease swept through them. Dysentery, measles, whooping cough, fever. People began to die in the stockades before the journey had even begun. The very old and the very young first, weakened by the shock, the squalor, and the despair. One soldier who took part in the roundup, a man who had also fought in other wars, would write years later that the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work he had ever known. He had seen men shot to pieces in battle, he said, but the removal of the Cherokee was the cruelest thing he had ever witnessed. That was the testimony of one of the men carrying it out. The first groups were sent west in the summer heat, and it went badly. A terrible drought had dried up the rivers and scorched the land. The heat was murderous. Sickness spread. So many people died on these first detachments that the operation was halted. And here the Cherokee leadership made one last desperate intervention. John Ross, seeing his people dying in the hands of the army, petitioned General Scott for permission to manage the removal himself. If his people had to go, at least let them go under their own leaders, at their own pace, with some shred of dignity. Scott agreed. But it came with a terrible cost in timing. Because Ross's plan meant waiting until the worst of the summer heat had passed, the great body of the Cherokee would now make their journey in the autumn and winter. They would be walking 1,000 miles on foot directly into the teeth of one of the coldest winters in living memory. The choice was an impossible one: heat and drought, or cold and snow. There was no good option. There was only survival for those who could manage it. In the autumn of 1838, the detachments began to move. Around 16,000 people, divided into groups of roughly 1,000 each, set out from their homeland on a journey of more than 1,000 miles. They walked away from the mountains they had known their whole lives, away from their fields and their rivers and the graves of their ancestors, and they turned their faces west toward a land they had never seen. Behind them, their entire world. Ahead of them, the cold and the unknown, and for thousands of them, a grave by the side of the road. The journey was 1,000 miles of suffering. The route led them out of Georgia and Tennessee, up through Kentucky, across the Ohio River, through the southern tip of Illinois, across the wide Mississippi, through Missouri, and finally into the territory that had been set aside for them in present-day Oklahoma. Most of them walked every step of it. The very young, the very old, and the sick rode in wagons when there were wagons. But for most, it was their own 2 feet, mile after mile, day after day, week after week, for months. As they walked, winter closed in around them, and it was a brutal one. The temperatures plunged, snow fell, the rivers froze. The Cherokee, many of whom had been taken from their homes with only the clothes on their backs, had little protection against it. They wrapped themselves in whatever blankets they had and trudged on through the freezing mud and snow, their feet wrapped in rags, their bodies bent against the wind. The food, which the government had promised to provide, was often not there or was rotten and inedible when it arrived. Private contractors had been hired to supply the detachments, and many of them simply pocketed the money and delivered spoiled grain and tainted meat, or far too little of it. So on top of the cold, there was hunger. People grew weaker and weaker, and the weaker they became, the more easily the sickness took them. And the sickness was everywhere. Whooping cough, typhus, dysentery, cholera, pneumonia, all of it moving through the exhausted, starving, freezing column of people. There was little medicine and few doctors. Once a person fell ill on the trail, there was often nothing to be done but watch and pray, and bury them when it was over. That was the rhythm of the trail. Walk and bury the dead. Walk and bury the dead. The detachments left a line of graves behind them stretching across half the country. They could not even stop to mourn properly. The column had to keep moving, so the dead were buried hastily by the side of the road, sometimes with barely a moment to mark the spot, and the living walked on, knowing they were leaving their mothers, their fathers, their children, their husbands and wives behind them in the cold ground of a strange land they would never see again. The grief is almost impossible to comprehend. Imagine a mother carrying her child for mile after frozen mile, feeling the small body grow colder until she has to stop and dig a grave in the frozen earth with her own hands, and then keep walking. This was not a rare tragedy on the trail. It happened again and again to family after family. One account tells of a woman who, it was said, lost her husband and then her children, one by one, along the way, and kept walking, because there was nothing else she could do. Even Chief John Ross, the man who had fought so hard and so long to prevent all of this, did not escape its cruelty. As he led his people west, his own wife, Elizabeth, traveled with them, and somewhere along that frozen trail, she fell ill and she died. It is said that she gave her only blanket to a sick child during the journey, and in doing so, exposed herself to the cold that killed her. The leader who had given everything to save his people from this trail now buried his own wife beside it. By the time the last detachments straggled into the Western Territory in the early months of 1839, the scale of the loss was staggering. Of the roughly 16,000 Cherokee who had been driven from their homes, around 4,000 had died. Some died in the stockades, some on the trail, and some in the harsh first months after arrival, in a strange land with no shelter prepared and the promised supplies once again failing to appear. A quarter of the entire Cherokee nation gone. An entire generation marked forever by what they had endured. They called it, in their own language, the trail where they cried. The Trail of Tears. The arrival in the West was not the end of the suffering. The land they had been given was unfamiliar and hard. The shelter and supplies they had been promised were inadequate or missing entirely. That first winter in the new territory killed many more, the survivors of the trail now dying within sight of its end. And there was one more tragedy still to come, a wound the nation inflicted upon itself, born of all the rage and grief of the removal. The bitterness against the men who had signed the Treaty of New Echota, the men who had given away the homeland, had not faded. It had hardened into something deadly. In the summer of 1839, just months after the survivors arrived in the West, that fury boiled over. Major Ridge, his son John, and his nephew Elias, the leaders of the treaty party, were hunted down and killed in revenge for the treaty they had signed. Major Ridge's grim prophecy had come true. He had signed his death warrant after all. The removal had not only killed thousands on the trail, it had turned the survivors against one another and stained their arrival with the blood of their own. It would take years for the wounds to even begin to heal. But here is the part of the story that the men who planned the removal never expected and could never have understood. The Cherokee did not die. The nation did not disappear. Against every expectation, in that hard Western land, the survivors began, slowly, to rebuild. Under the leadership of John Ross, who continued to guide his people until his death decades later, they built new homes. They cleared new fields. They established a new capital. They built schools again, opening academies for their sons and daughters within just a few years of the catastrophe. They started new newspapers, printed once more in Sequoia's syllabary and in English. They wrote new laws and rebuilt their government. They took the pieces of the world that had been shattered, and with extraordinary resilience, they put it back together. The people who had tried to erase the Cherokee had failed. You can take a people's land. You can burn their homes and rob their graves and march them 1,000 miles through the snow. You can kill a quarter of them along the way. But the Cherokee proved something on the far side of that trail that is worth remembering. A people is not only its land. A people is its language, its memory, its children, its will to endure. And all of that, the Cherokee carried with them, every step of that terrible road, and they would not let it die. Today, the Cherokee Nation is one of the largest native nations in the United States, with hundreds of thousands of citizens. They still speak the language Sequoia gave them. They still remember the names of the ones who walked and the ones who fell. The trail that was meant to be their ending became, instead, a passage they survived, and the proof of how much they could endure. It would be comforting to think of the Trail of Tears as ancient history, a dark deed from a distant age that has nothing to do with us now. But it was not so very long ago. There are photographs of some of the people who walked that trail as children, who lived into the age of the camera, their faces lined with the memory of it. And the questions it raises have never really gone away. What a nation chooses to do to the powerless, what we are willing to take from others, and how we justify it to ourselves. How easily talk of civilization and law and progress can be used to cover something that is, underneath, simply theft and cruelty. The Cherokee asked only to be allowed to keep what was already theirs and to live as they had chosen to live, peacefully, on the land of their ancestors. They did everything that was asked of them, and more. It was not enough, because the thing they had was wanted by someone stronger. That is the heart of it. And it is why their story still has the power to shame us and to move us all these years later. So when you hear the name, the Trail of Tears, remember that it was not a natural disaster, not a plague or a famine or a flood. It was a choice, made by people, carried out by people, against other people who had done nothing to deserve it. 4,000 of them lie in unmarked graves along that trail to this day. The least we can do, all these years later, is refuse to look away. Remember the road they walked, and remember that they walked it, and that their children are still here.